Is the video on? Okay. Oh, and there's Sarah.
There we go.
All right, here we go. Welcome, everyone. I call the September 17, 2025 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to conduct study sessions on the Climate Action Plan update, the Critical Area Ordinance update, and draft code amendments, middle housing and exclusionary housing amendments, and the annual comprehensive plan miscellaneous code amendments. Before I move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. The City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. Please limit all comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment. Please remember this during your comments. Also, as we are in an election season, I would like to remind everyone of certain campaign-related restrictions regarding public comment on campaigns and/or ballot measures. Public speakers generally cannot specifically address a campaign or ballot measure at a public meeting or during a public comment period. RCW 42.17a.555 prohibits government agencies from allowing the use of public facilities either directly or indirectly for campaign purposes. Allowing speakers to speak in favor of or opposition to a ballot measure or campaign during a public meeting during the comment period would violate this prohibition. Public comment will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those comments by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. Those in attendance may also make comments and have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on the sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell Notice, City website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. Video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available later for viewing on the city's YouTube channel. The call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone can follow along. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Lever.
Here.
Commissioner Robson.
Here.
Commissioner Sills.
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
And in addition, staff in attendance include Deputy Community Director Gates and Planner Cameron Colvin, Planner Jacqueline Sampson, and Planner Ray Sosa from Community Development. Lastly, before I begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. At specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by raising your hand. I will call on you as I see you. This will avoid the problem of having 2 people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. First item on the agenda is public comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Well, so we have no one in the audience. There'll be no one there. Have we received any written comments? No? Anyone in the Zoom room? No? So seeing that there are no public comments at this meeting, we'll move on to our next item, which is approval of the September 3rd minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner Robson?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, it's been a move to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Commissioner Lever, 1 second.
No, go right ahead, Commissioner Lever. You seconded? Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the September 3rd meeting. Any comment on those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the September minutes, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And it is unanimous. The minutes are approved. With that, we will move into our study session, starting with the Climate Action Plan update.
Give me one moment here. Okay. So I know we have a pretty packed agenda tonight, so I'll try to move fairly quickly. But the main point of this item tonight is to run through the feedback we received on the initial draft of the Climate Action Plan over the past month, and start talking through, clarify any remaining questions, and look at beginning to draft findings, conclusions, and recommendations. So I'll provide just a super brief project recap to highlight what we've done over the course of the year, the public comments that were received, the revisions we made, the supplemental outreach that we did in addition to that, and an engagement recap, and then discussion and next steps. So as you all are familiar, this project began at the beginning of this year and was kind of broken up into 4 phases. The first phase primarily focusing on identifying key community priorities and concerns. So we formed an initial volunteer advisory committee to help provide more detailed guidance, as well as conducted an initial community survey. We also completed a citywide greenhouse gas inventory and the city's first municipal inventory that looked at emissions from city operations specifically. Second phase focused on setting goals and identifying priority implementation strategies. So we hosted 2 community workshops on Bothell's largest emission sources, transportation and buildings and energy, and conducted a second community survey to have people weigh in on which strategies and actions they most resonated with. And then most recently, we put out the full draft plan for people to review and collected public feedback on that. So what did we learn? We learned that the transportation sector makes up a large portion of emissions in Bothell, both at the community-wide scale, but also city operations as well. So a lot of that is, on-road vehicle emissions, and then followed by the built environment, so the electricity and natural gas that powers our homes and businesses. We also looked at future emissions projections, so recognizing that future emissions are projected to increase if no action is taken. We looked at existing state and federal policies and how those will help us get a large portion of the way there, but that additional local action is needed to help us reach our climate goals. And then finally, we saw through the surveys and other engagement work that there is strong community support for proactive climate action. 95% saying that it's important or very important that Bothell take proactive measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then similarly, a large percentage saying that our reduction targets should be aggressive and at least meet state targets or exceed them. And then, I think through this work, we also identified a lot of great things that are already happening within the community and throughout Bothell. So this was a good opportunity to become more aware of those, identify some future partnerships that we're excited about to help support the implementation work. Okay, so the draft itself, we utilized a new platform that the city hasn't utilized before, but it's part of our Engage Bothell contract. It's called Conveo. And so this is a platform where people can go through a document and provide direct comments. So they can click on the specific graphic or paragraph and flag typos, make suggestions, ask clarifying questions. So we really found this to be a really useful tool, and we're excited to to use it for some of the other projects in long range that are coming up. It also provides a useful way to compile all of the comments in one area. So, we don't have to scroll through a whole document. We can easily see them in one place and go through and make sure that we're addressing those throughout the document. So the public comment period ran for a little over a month, from July 28th to August 31st. We ended up having 1,302 total views. So the platform does count repeat visitors. Total comments received 48. Total distinguished commenters was 11. And we worked with our communications team to try to make this a big push. So it sat on the front of the city website as a news flash for several weeks. Went out on our social medias, as well as making people aware of this at the events over the past month. So just as the comments we received were pretty wide-ranging. Everything from clarifying questions, typos, formatting suggestions, but substantive comments, just to summarize those, a lot of them were focused on taking into account Bothell's local context and just better highlighting potential barriers to implementation. So, for instance, acknowledging that certain transportation modes like bicycle, pedestrian, is not going to be suited for all cases, like grocery store runs where you're hauling a lot of things, or during certain periods of the year where we have more rain, things like that. And then also considering and better highlighting some of the potential impacts to affordability, and also where those overlaps are with housing affordability. And the rest of the comments were mostly on clarifying questions and smaller edits. So we went through each of those individually to try to clarify any areas where there were uncertainty or questions. We updated some of the narrative sections to address some of those points that were brought up about local context and affordability considerations. And then we also, during this time, we asked people to submit community success stories. So we also added in a couple of those to highlight some of the work that's already going on in this area. And so at our last meeting, kind of what we were hearing is that we wanted to do some additional targeted outreach, specifically focused on reaching more of local businesses as well as community organizations. So in order to kind of fill those remaining gaps, we did some direct outreach with just a short list of questions, mainly focused on highlighting those community success stories. So what are these organizations already doing? Identifying those overlaps and potential partnerships, so how the city can best support what they're already doing or would like to do further. And then gathering more generalized feedback on the draft plan and specific strategies or actions that they had comments on. So just to highlight, there's a wide range of areas where businesses and local community groups are already doing work, everything from waste reduction, sustainable purchasing, commute trip reduction, habitat conservation, and multiple businesses that did respond did have some type of formal either zero waste or carbon neutral goals internally as part of their organization as well. The main things that came out of how can the city best support your work, the main things were providing clear information on available incentives and funding, simplifying permitting for green initiatives and providing technical support, and then strategic investments in infrastructure. And then the specific strategies or actions that were brought up or highlighted, again, tree planting and retention, a big one, heat island reduction, expanding our EV charging network, and then providing digestible information and local examples, and then considering housing affordability overlaps. So we got a couple of different local success stories, but I wanted to just highlight one that's a great example of how this type of work has overlapping benefits. So Threads and Treads is a free clothing bank run by the Canyon Park Middle School PTSA, and they do a lot of great work to make sure that kids and families have the supplies and clothing that they need leading into the school year. And they actually mentioned that, items that are donated that they're not able to use, they partner with the Northwest Center to redistribute those or repurpose items so that, those don't go to waste in addition to that. So just a great example of, the many, many benefits that this work can provide. So just looking at the project as a whole, this graphic just kind of provides an overview of the different engagement that was done throughout the project. And a couple things not featured on here are like the in-person events that we attended throughout the project, the more direct kind of word-of-mouth interactions that took place as well. I did want to highlight the work of the Volunteer Advisory Committee that was formed. They are a really dedicated group of community members, and a lot of them are already plugged in with, the university, nonprofits, local businesses. So they're going to be a great resource moving forward, and they're very excited to help support the implementation of a lot of this work. So I just wanted to highlight that as we kind of wrap things up with the plan and then focus on how we start getting some of this stuff off the ground. And then also just wanted to highlight that this is building upon the work that was done during the comprehensive plan as well. We did do some focused outreach specifically to inform the climate element. So that involved additional interviews, public surveys, and topic-specific work groups. And then last thing, this is like all the city's plans will be a living document that gets updated every few years as we get new greenhouse inventory data. So we will continue to work with our partners in the community to support implementation. And with that, I will move on to discussions. Any questions about any of the material I covered? The main questions I kind of wanted to pose tonight were if there's any lingering questions or things within the plan that need to be clarified, or any things that you think are still missing or need to be fleshed out over the next couple of weeks before we come back to really finalize things and round things out.
Commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner Jones.
Thank you. Once again, as I started to have questions when I was reading it, I just reminded myself to be patient and keep reading because the answers were all there. Excellent job. Really liked the synergy, the discussion about the synergy with other plans. And it's going to be nice to see some of that move forward because the heat islands, for example, will be something that can be addressed and those types of things. I really like that you reached out to community organizations and businesses and got additional feedback, and you also incorporated those comments and addressed them in the report. And so that was really responsive, and so that was really impressive. Love the format with the color coding, and it's so easy to read, so it's great. Also like that you included the implementation plan, at least a tentative start. These are the kinds of things we're thinking about doing, short-term, long-term, with ongoing evaluation, reporting, all of those types of things. So I had one nitpicky little comment and then a couple of questions. So the nitpicky thing was on, I think it's page 11, when you talk about, climate change and the actual degrees and things like that. You actually list, one is listed in Fahrenheit and one is listed in Celsius. And I think the average member of the public is not going to notice that those, and then they won't get the sense of what's going on. And so I don't know if you want to put in parentheses the conversion or something, so folks get a sense of how much we're trying to avoid in terms of temperature change.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't caught that.
So that's a nitpicky one. This is just a suggestion, not necessarily to address in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to bring up the parking plan that I know we're going to see soon. And I was wondering if EV chargers could be addressed as part of the parking plan as you think about putting that together. You know, I've read in several reports that say that what really affects folks who are not wealthy in terms of them moving forward with purchasing EVs, because now the used EVs are on the market and they're actually pretty reasonable, is lack of access, because they don't have access in their homes, they don't have access in their apartments, et cetera. And so I do think, in thinking about that in terms of the parking plan for the city might be something to address. So not for this, but for a future plan. And then the one thing I didn't see addressed that I think was brought up, and I do think it needs to be addressed, and I do realize this was more focused on mitigation rather than adaptation. But you do talk about the extreme temperatures and the impacts from smoke, et cetera. And there's mention about, you know, sort of community centers, clean air centers, cooling centers. But I didn't see any of that in the actual plan. And I know that's challenging, but you do have long-term, short-term, medium-term types of goals. And I wonder if the next step is a study as to what could be locations. And I think you'd have to partner with groups, because I don't think the city runs their own community centers. So I think you'd probably have to partner with folks. Anyway, those were just some suggestions, but you know, for good or bad.
Thank you.
Can I jump in real quick? We do have a Civic Spark this next year secured, who will be starting in October, who's going to focus primarily on EV, kind of taking where the Public Works, the Civic Spark for Public Works last year, wrapped up her work on EV chargers, charging stations, with an inventory, and then taking it to the next level of where do we need them, where are there gaps, and really kind of expand that knowledge and understanding of what do we need to do next, tying it in with several implementation strategies within the comp plan that align really, really well with this and with what you were getting at there.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Robson?
Thank you. I want to start by saying this document is beautiful. You guys have done really great with your infographics and your photography and iconography. It's amazing. So congratulations. This looks really, really great. It's super easy to go through. I need to do my, it seems like almost per meeting question. Can you tell me a little bit about who gave input when you're talking about community partnerships that you did the survey with?
Yeah, so where we kind of started with local businesses was where there were kind of obvious already ties. So reaching out to the larger employers that have commute trip reduction requirements, reaching out to previous Sustainamania vendors was a big one, and then also working with the chamber to get stuff out. And then community organizations wise included faith-based organizations, nonprofits, school PTSAs that we had contacts for, and a couple other groups. So it was pretty wide-ranging. Yeah.
When you were, reaching out to these groups, this isn't going to come out right. What was the agenda? What were you asking about? Were you asking to align? Were you just giving them the survey to catch those stragglers? Were you asking them for partnerships? What was the angle there?
Yeah, so the main focus was to get more information about, what's already being done, how the city can support that and how that ties into the climate action plan itself. And then, yeah, gathering more direct feedback on if there's any specific comments of what you would like to see or that's missing from the plan itself. So a little bit of all of those things.
Are there any opportunities right now to continue to reach out to businesses that maybe don't have those kinds of environmental plans on their books? Because that seems to be a major group that we should be targeting.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's a partnership that, we can work with our economic development coordinator on and continue building those. So most definitely.
Okay, my last question is, I'm glad to hear that you reached out to some of the churches and things, because we had mentioned before that that's a great way to sort of get to people on the margins. I know we have a DEI person on staff. What was their role in her collecting data from marginalized populations for this project?
Yeah, so our DEI coordinator, Gabby, is really the one building those relationships on the ground. And so she is kind of a good liaison for the city to make groups aware of things that are happening at the city, and then making them aware about that and how we can best involve them. That was their primary role as a part of this.
Did was she able to collect any data through her contacts or not at this time?
In terms of demographics?
Yeah, and when people are expressing what they'd like to see, what they need, how environmental changes will be impacting them, I feel like Gabby plays a vital role in getting that information from people who might otherwise not be able to give it to us.
Yeah, most definitely. So we have demographic data for all of the surveys that were conducted. The individual or more direct outreach, we don't necessarily, because a lot of those contacts represent groups of people. So it's not necessarily like a one-to-one, like somebody taking a survey would be. But, I think they would have insight on general demographics of who they typically work with or whatnot.
I'm sorry, I'm still not clear. I was just, so she has links within various communities, which is awesome. And so so for this project, she interviewed just her contacts rather than having that contact be a conduit to reach larger groups that we might be able to survey. So is that correct? She just reached out to her, shall we say, first tier contacts?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the way we typically work together is the various departments. If we have a project like this going on, we coordinate on engagement opportunities. And so Gabby's like our primary messenger to help relay that out to those relationships that she's built.
That's great, and it's really important to get that information out there. I would also like to use, it would be great to have a DEI initiative to expand ways that people could contact us rather than just letting them know that there are ways to contact us. I think one of the major barriers is they cannot use those methods, and I think that we've been saying that on the Planning Commission quite a bit. So it would be wonderful if we could use our DEI person to not just reach that first tier, but then to expand into those communities who are obviously not a monolith, and so to get that variety of their opinions, their needs, their concerns could be super valuable. And I'd love to see Gabby expand her role, if at all possible, to be able to access that input.
Other comments, questions? Commissioner Liver?
Thank you, Commissioner Lever here. I just want to echo what Commissioner Robinson expressed, and I also echo everyone's comments so far about this is a wonderful plan, and I appreciate all the efforts for the engagement component. And I think just my biggest comment is around what it means to really engage and get the input that we need from a very busy community. Like we all have, you have that fatigue of getting input and receiving input and like, where do I go? I mean, I particularly appreciated the comment of, oh, this was great. And then I think about your background. As I was reading it, I was just like, oh dear, because this is not my area of expertise. And I really, and I don't think necessarily something that we can do at a city level, but when I think about all the requirements that we have at a state level in terms of the things that we have to meet to make it happen, it becomes like a barrier for meaningful engagement. So as we move with the implementation, yes, simplifying it, and I'm looking at the cost range, and it's like, what does it mean to be too costly? Like, what does it mean to really make sure that we understand the impact on the department? When I think about the engagement component and just like one individual doing the outreach for the city seems almost like undoable. So for me, it's really thinking of like, what are some of the tools and resources that we can provide to make sure that staff can be almost like a Gabi within yourself, because you do touch into so many, but there's just so many needs that we have in terms of gathering the input, and particularly what kind of input is it that we're requesting. I am particularly intrigued on how this implementation of these multiple priorities is going to play out with the competing agendas around what does it mean to have more affordable housing or support transportation, at the same time preserve the environment. So this is a great end product, and I look forward to see how that really looks out. But when it comes to the implementation and the tracking and our ability to support, okay, why did this particular initiative got approved or prioritized? Like, I would like to be able to have more information of the why we prioritize one over the other in a way that seems more meaningful for a range of I guess, groups that may be in different spaces of understanding what is it that we're trying to do. But this is great. Oh, thank you.
I was just going to mention real quick, so our long-range team actually just met two of our new communications team that were recently hired. So our staff capacity is slowly increasing. So those two particular individuals, one is going to be focused on digital media, so managing our social media accounts, and he has previous work with WashDOT, who is great at this, of making things more relatable and really identifying where those connection points are with people, rather than putting out very technical or formal information. And then the other is specifically going to be focused on engagement. So their role is more going to be like a coordinator amongst the departments, so that we are all working together on outreach initiatives and engagement and how we can improve those. So today was our second day, but those things are in development, and so we'll look forward to providing more updates as those happen.
Others? Would you like to move forward to the findings, conclusions, and recommendations?
Sure.
Hello?
Oh, Sarah? Commissioner Gustafson,
Hi.
I'm sorry, I didn't look up.
Yeah, Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you so much. One thing that was incredibly fascinating to me was the greenhouse emissions report. And I was very curious to see that there have been dramatic reductions in emissions from the built environment, focusing on industrial processes. My question is this because our manufacturing and other businesses are getting more efficient, or is it because we have lost that capacity, or is it some mix of both? Do we understand the driver here for this positive change?
Yeah, when I spoke with our utility providers and Cascadia Consulting, when looking at the data, a lot of that was associated with an increasing proportion of renewable energies and participation in some of the renewable energy programs that the utilities started offering a couple of years back. So that's mostly what is contributing to those recent reductions.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear that. I might consider putting a note in there to explain why, because it gives positive reinforcement that what we're doing and as a community is really helping, and this is how it's helping. One little nitpick is that I love the colors, but I do believe that the colors change between solid waste and built environment on different pages. So if we're going to use a pie chart where one is purple, let's make sure in the list the next one is purple. But other than that, it's gorgeous, and I agree with other commissioners. Like, we are in a new era with the city staff and their partners and what they've done.
Thank you. So in your packets, I had included just a rough draft of kind of findings and conclusions. These can be edited as much as you would like, taking things out, added to, but we can kind of go through those a little bit, and then any feedback from tonight I can go back and refine and bring back an updated list for you all to consider in a couple of weeks. So in terms of findings, the ones that I highlighted were that our HB 1181 requirements and how the climate action plan is building upon that work and helping us comply with the GHG reduction goals and tracking emissions moving forward. That this plan aligns with our most recent comprehensive plan update and the new climate element. That we conducted a climate vulnerability assessment as part of that previous work and the findings from that. That we saw strong support for proactive climate action from the engagement work. And then mentioning the greenhouse gas reduction targets from the state and regional partners, that greenhouse gas emissions are projected to increase and that local action is needed, and what we found from our greenhouse gas inventory work. I think that was it for the findings. Is there anything missing here that you all think is important to note that I might not have captured?
Commissioner Lever?
Thank you. I have a question that may not be necessarily part of the findings, but when it comes to an understanding of the cost, so I know that this was funded through the $500,000 and all of these consultants and adding like the different targeted outreach that you did, like where are you with the budget? Are you within budget? Are you about to, go through the entire budget? Are you gonna have some extra? And if so, how can that be used for implementation campaign or?
Yeah, so in terms of the grant itself, that wrapped up in June, all within budget. And we were also utilizing a portion of our ARPA funds to support this work. And so we have allocated some of that to support some of the implementation upcoming. And then as Christian mentioned, we also have a new CiviSpark starting next year that will also be able to provide some additional capacity. One thing I do plan on putting together, and maybe I can get that done and bring that back next week, is kind of going through the list of strategies and actions and just flagging which ones. Several of them are already baked into existing city programs, so things like our bike and pedestrian work, the work that our transit providers are doing, things like that. But some of them, the ones that were identified, may be new or ones that we'll have to go pursue new funding for. So I want to put together a list so that's more clearly kind of broken out for you all to consider.
Commissioner Sills and then Commissioner Lever.
Yeah, for conclusions 6 or 7 or 6 and 7, my suggestion might be to add something like co-benefits such as economic resiliency or something referencing the economy, because I think it's important to note that we're not making that trade-off, and a lot of some of these examples are actually ways that could benefit the economy or make things more affordable. So some reference to that I think would be important to include.
Commissioner Oliver?
Thank you. I thank you for that, the response earlier. I think if possible, it will be great to really mention that, like the project was completed within budget, or even there was that extra, because not ever, like, we take that for granted. And I also really appreciate the fact that there's an understanding of those capacity constraints and that the city is investing internally with staff. And, you know, sometimes, again, that we take it for granted. So that will be great. And within that budget component, really in terms of transparency, just really kind of providing a breakdown of where the money went, to make sure that there's a clear understanding of how these resources are used, and they were well used, because we now have a plan. So thank you.
Anything else on the findings?
I think that's all, unless there's any additional comments on that. Most of the conclusions kind of follow a similar structure or points. So the first, just that the plan was developed, drafted, noticed, and reviewed by the public and considered by the Planning Commission in accordance with all state laws. Adoption of the Climate Action Plan is necessary to advance the city's climate goals and comply with new requirements of the GMA and HB 1181. That the Climate Action Plan is consistent with our new comp plan and new climate element, as well as supports City Council's 2040 vision. That the targets set forth in the Climate Action Plan are consistent with state and regional greenhouse gas reduction targets. That the plan reflects the strong support for proactive climate action. That the strategies and actions outlined will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as provide those co-benefits mentioned. And then just finally, that adoption of the plan will benefit the public health, safety, and welfare of the community.
Comments on conclusions? Commissioner Jones?
So just a couple things to consider, and I think it builds off of what Commissioner Lever said, and possibly Commissioner Sills as well. One is, I wonder if in the conclusions we want to point out that success with the Climate Action Plan is dependent on the synergy with the other plans, or something to that effect, because there's so many things that have to work together for this to be successful, and some are already there, right, as you mentioned. And then, so related to that, second comment is, for transparency purposes, would it be helpful to be specific about, maybe you can't be specific about the amount of funding that will be required to fully implement the plan over the next X number of years, but maybe you could give some sense of, and for which strategies. So what I don't think we'd want to have happen is for everyone to just assume that, oh, the city has the funding to put in EV chargers and all of these and this and this and this. So I wonder if that would help with transparency.
Definitely.
Other comments on conclusions? These do go directly to the council as our voice on what we've heard, so I think you did an excellent job presenting us something, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
And then finally, the recommendation is that we recommend that it be adopted. I assume we're all on board with that. I see heads nodding, so I think that's all you needed from us tonight, right? No votes on anything, just.
Yeah, no, the feedback is perfect. Like I said, we'll go back this week, over the next couple of weeks, try to address some of the substantive plan comments, to address those within the report itself, as well as update the findings, conclusions for you all for next week. I did just have a slide quickly on next steps, just to round us out. So this Saturday is Sustainamania, the city's annual sustainability fair. So this is really a great opportunity for us to highlight this work in the plan itself, and also get people talking about or thinking about how they can get involved or support implementation. And then in terms of upcoming meetings, so we'll come back on the 1st to finalize findings, conclusions, and recommendations. We'll be doing a final study session, kind of similar to what we did tonight with City Council, to go over the updates to the plan, kind of summarize the work that was done and answer any remaining questions, and then come back mid-November for consideration for adoption.
So I want to thank you for your hard work and all the staff who worked on this. It's a very important topic, perhaps one of the more important topics we will see. And it's excellent work. The document represents that work. So thanks again, and we look forward to its adoption.
Thank you very much.
Moving on, our next item would be the critical area ordinance update and draft code amendments. Next.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to be back. Always hard to follow Cameron. He did such an awesome job. Tonight, we're going to take the next step towards update to critical area ordinance. While Jacqueline catches up with her time zone, I'm gonna carry this forward. She laid the groundwork really well. Previous discussions set me up really well last week at City Council. Tonight, really, we just want to talk about what we heard at City Council last week. Get your feedback on the critical area ordinance, mandatory update, the voluntary SEPA threshold exemption level change. Take any of that feedback and then move it forward so we can wrap that up this year. Just a brief background, because I do want to make sure, I think we're running pretty good on time tonight, and I'm glad to see that. Brief background, this is a required review. Critical area ordinances must follow best available science. We had a best available science report analysis completed by Facet last year as part of the comp plan work, and it sat on the shelf ready for us to do this work once we had the capacity to do it. Also must follow the GMA requirements, and critical area ordinances that we know are all based in the fallout from the 1990 GMA adoptions. So what this is updates to 1404 for critical area ordinance. It is not anything to do with the shoreline master program. So it does not discuss North Creek, Sammamish River, a small section of, I think, Waynita Creek, just those other areas. And I'm going to run through the moderate, minor, and then no change sections, similar to the way we approached it with City Council, and we'll stop after the moderate change because that tends to be the one that's got the most questions or discussion. So this past year, the recommendations that came from Fish and Wildlife, Department of Ecology, were to consider adjustments to stream buffers. We're not talking about wetland buffers. We were just talking about stream buffers and changing those. The minimum recommendation was a 100-foot buffer for all stream types to ensure water quality standards. There was an additional recommendation to follow site potential tree height, which has a varying amount of distance between 90 or up to over 200 feet, depending on the soil typology in an area. When we looked at that, we looked at what the mapping showed, it was all over the board. You could be across the street, you could be on the same property, and the buffer would go from 102-foot buffer because the soils were identified as consistent with an alder, and then 10 feet away, the soils could change to, and these are generalizations, it's not a criticism, it's just it makes it very, very difficult, up to 187-foot Doug fir potential. So that inconsistency would require a homeowner, an applicant, to always consider, evaluating the soil types, not really knowing what's there. So we set a fixed 100-foot stream buffer as the minimum, as the floor, understanding that within that stream distance, from the very upper reaches all the way down as it flows into a larger stream, the 100-foot buffer is going to accommodate the water quality improvement. And whether it's a perennial stream and it's only flowing in the winter, we want to treat that area the same we would treat a higher classification of stream that does flow year round, making sure that water is handled through that. So we included the 100-foot buffer minimum, but we flipped it around, and I'll show you in a table here in a second, based on council input, when we incorporated the vegetative buffer standard. So trying to incentivize good buffers, no invasives, with that 100-foot distance, but they would start off at a slightly larger length distance if they didn't want to update that with the project. The vegetative buffer standard would also apply to wetlands, so that was just carrying it across all buffer types. We're deleting or recommending to delete the variant section. There are already provisions within the critical area ordinance to allow for flexibilities when a site is heavily encumbered, whether that is buffer averaging or it's a reasonable use exception. So finding the way to kind of work within a small area and minimize that. With the first item on this table, on this slide, there will likely be nonconformities created. We understand that. We don't want to take away the ability for somebody to continue and maintain or potentially even add on. We added in some nonconformance standards that allow for various degrees of structure repair, maintenance, addition, or alteration, trying to be really, really clear in what can happen. So somebody can read through it and see, okay, I can add a 200 square foot addition on this part of my house, even though it's in the buffer, because, and it runs down through those criteria. Currently, our stream buffer system is set up with a type F, or a fish-bearing stream, has a 100-foot buffer, a non-perennial, non-salmon-bearing stream is 75, and then an intermittent stream that just flows in the winter is 50 feet. So, like I said before, the buffer differences between when you apply site potential tree height vary dramatically, and it does vary across all of Bothell. Our initial recommendation that we talked about here was to go to this 133-foot buffer, which you could reduce down to 100. Or sorry, you'd start with a 100-foot buffer, but it would go up to 133. Council liked the idea of just saying, no, start with the base buffer, and you can reduce it. The incentive is what we want people to consider, and they wanted us to consider, potential variation in the buffer distances. The floor is still 100 as far as what we're recommending, based on that minimum recommendation from Fish and Wildlife. We are waiting to hear back from them on their comments. Next time that we check in with you, we will have those in the packet, so you'll be able to see what their comments are. We think that this approach gives, in the blue column, a good basis for predictability with opportunity for achieving a buffer along a stream that functions well with native plantings, part of the work that we'll do that's implementation will involve a lot of information and handouts that can help somebody work through, what does this look like? What does my buffer look like? Am I covered in invasives, or is it doing pretty well? I think looking around the region, it's really hard to find a really highly functioning all native buffer until you get up into the mountains. And hopefully with this practice and with the redevelopment that we're expecting over the next 20 years as we build out, as we see what we've recently completed with the comp plan update, it creates that opportunity to find the balance of establishing these buffers and improving them and holding them to that 100 feet while still allowing that development to take place. Any questions on this moderate group of amendments with the newer change after receiving input from council?
Commissioner Liver?
Thank you, Commissioner Lever. Can you help me clarify if this is the one recommendation that the city disagree with the consultant? Because there were a number of recommendations, and I just remember reading the one where we don't agree with I think, remember the soil and all of that, and if the answer is yes, can you please help me better understand who will bear the cost of that soil analysis? Like, who will be responsible for making sure that there's compliance with whatever it is that we decide to do?
Yeah, and so the facet report, so they weren't recommending, they were carrying forward what the Fish and Wildlife's recommendation for implementation of site potential tree height, the various buffers from 90 to over 200 feet. Their minimum recommendation is the 100-foot buffer, as long as we use the vegetative buffer standard. So there was sort of a two-part approach there. 100-foot minimum, as long as you're using vegetative buffer standard, which left a lot of room for interpretation with other jurisdictions, those that Jacqueline's been working with and coordinating with around our region. They're all kind of proposing, well, maybe it's 130, maybe it's 150, but understanding that this 100 is really the bottom of the smallest distance that we would want to see. To your question on who would bear the cost, it would be the property owner to evaluate it. The data that the state has is very general. We can learn through it, but it's, you're talking about one property versus another, and the variation is dramatic in a 2-block area. So we wouldn't be able to, as staff, we wouldn't be able to review anything without knowing, well, what are your soil types? If we were looking to apply site potential tree height, that would be the first thing that would have to happen. So they would either have to have a geotechnical engineer or a soils biologist, or if I'm not sure if a wetland biologist could do it, but a qualified professional to evaluate their soil type, unless they just wanted to accept what that site potential tree height map was identifying, to their benefit or not. But we think that this creates a more predictable distance, similar to how we've been doing it for a long time, as far as here's your fixed buffer, and here's what you can or can't do within it. So, does that help there?
Yes, thank you. And with the need that we have for housing and the development that we expect to see, how is this approach or this recommendation not necessarily, and maybe I'm kind of like looking forward to what Commissioner Westerberg has to say about all of this too, around like the, I remember the comments from last meeting when we talked about this one, that this might be just changes that benefit developers and not necessarily the environment. So what is the, I guess, the contra argument to that? Because as I'm hearing, it's really expensive, and then we're really trying to make sure that we do preserve the environment at the same time that we can streamline the process in a way that can be really, there can be compliance with it. But then there's that other narrative of, oh, we're just gonna make it easier for developers to destroy the environment. So can you help me?
Yeah, so I think the attempt here is to increase buffers to 100 feet across the board. So two of the three buffer types would go up to 100 feet, from 50 and 75 up to 100. So those do bring that up, limit how much buildable area is out there. That at the same time, by adding in a nonconformance section that allows for maintenance and additions, it does create the opportunity for a homeowner who's not a developer. Just, okay, here's my home. I live near a stream. What do I do? It creates the opportunity for them to work through that process, and that's part of the outreach, the work that staff does to answer questions on the what can I do. Sure, there may be development that takes place. It's not meant to assist one versus another. It's just creating the predictability of, I can go down to 100 feet. I need to know where that stream is. To be honest, any critical area, whether it's a stream, there can be associated wetlands with it. There can be steep slopes. It's generally are complex and difficult sites to develop. And I wouldn't take on a project personally lightly if I had that on my lot, because it is a lot of work. Trying to carve out the opportunity to keep something going that's there, that is working for someone, not forcing anybody out of where they are, but creating the predictability paired with the increased densities to hopefully create new opportunities within a smaller buildable footprint to respect and maintain that buffer. And overall, if it's 50 years from now, through or 100 years from now, through every development cycle, if these buffers held, theoretically, every stream would have a 100-foot buffer from headwaters to I guess, like the Sammamish River. So that's the pie in the sky type of approach, but we might see something close to that. But I think this sets up a level playing field for everyone to know what they're walking into. And a lot of what staff do at our permit center is educate on what's out there. Yeah.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Commissioner Westerbeck. Actually, following on our last meeting on this topic, I like the predictability being in this world. We love knowing that something's a certain way. It's 100 feet. Maybe could have been 80 or 75, whatever. It's a pretty small differentiation, and the consistency and the efficiency of just knowing certain things you can count on them and you can rely on them through your development process can actually save a lot of time and headache and money. So I actually like this, the streamlining and the simplicity of it. My actually comment was I was a little confused about something in the Table 1 Riparian Management Zone stream buffer. The type F says Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has, which is the other Salmona-bearing streams, 94 to 105 feet, where it's the maximum distance on all the other Kirkland, Woodinville, Newcastle, Bothell. And then you go down in buffer length for all the others, again, Bothell, Kirkland, Woodinville, Newcastle. But then you jump up on the, I guess what I would consider lower value streams to 187 to 231 feet for the type NP and type NS. And I don't know if that's a typo or that's what Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife wanted, or if that was a function of the Douglas fir versus the alder. It was really odd to me that they would want a salmonid stream to have a smaller, almost half as much buffer.
Yeah, I think that was part of the slide on the screen.
Yeah, it wasn't included in the packet, so.
But yeah, these aren't meant to run across these two. But yeah, the soil types in I think about the current environment here in Bothell, the lower elevation reaches of streams tend to have soil types that are more wetland type red alder.
Right.
I mean, there may be wetlands that you have to deal with
Those
in addition to it, but
yeah.
the further upland you go, the lower the classification may be but the soil type is leaning towards Doug fir, which would have larger buffers. And
That answered the question more when you showed us that. It
Okay.
just wasn't in here, and I was like, is that a mistake? So it makes more sense now that the tree type matters. Okay, I just want some clarity on that.
Okay.
Because that didn't make any sense to me.
And there are some jurisdictions, I think a couple counties, I think it was, I think Snohomish County, and maybe it was, it may have been Skagit, I can't recall. They have not adopted the site potential tree height.
Okay.
And they're primarily rural. They've got a lot of cities that just lean into the county regulations,
Sure.
especially up in Skagit.
Yeah, it's expensive to write your own. That's all I have. Again, I like the consistency, the predictability, the across-the-board simplicity of it, and I think it'll help coupled with what we've done with the comp plan and the development regulations. Like you said, it's so difficult and time-consuming everything to develop near ECA areas that are, you know, most, at least in my projects, we're not very aggressive about using those areas. So I don't see it as a problem. I see it as just a way to simplify code, and I like that. Thanks.
Other questions? Commissioner Lever?
Thank you, Commissioner Lever here. Are there any costs associated with these changes? Like, since this is gonna make it hopefully easier for like staff to review, or is capacity gonna be okay in terms of the enforcement component, or how are we doing in that space from a capacity standpoint?
Yeah, it'd be relatively similar. Still would have to, determine what the stream, where the stream is. You wouldn't be considering a stream type, right? It's a stream channel. Where is that located? Critical areas are tough. They're not always easy to tell where they are, where they extend to. And so that's why we have in our code, it says if there's, a known critical area, a stream or wetland within 300 feet of the subject property, it's like, okay, that the red flags go off and we start to consider what's out there. We'll take a look at the site. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to evaluate how we do things, how we help at the initial stages, where does a quick site visit with staff that may have a little bit of knowledge about, I think I can tell, the difference between this or that, or I can tell a stream channel from a non-stream channel, and give somebody at least that preliminary information to say there's something on your property, you're going to have it assessed. There is a cost to it, yes, and it varies. So that's just a lot of doing due diligence, learning a lot from staff, and our responsibility to provide information and support as much as we can. But it does add a cost significantly.
Commissioner Westbeck?
Just as far as cost goes, I'll chime in. I'm doing one for a project that's out of ways. It's not that bad.
So I've got a question. Page 144 until 145, there's a statement, Bothell currently does not have vegetative buffer standards to include water quality habitat. Code can be developed. So this is assuming compliant with vegetative buffer standard, which we don't currently have, if I read that correctly.
We do not currently have, the drafted code is in the packet.
Okay.
With a vegetative buffer standard layout of the planting types, what it would need to be planted to, and how that would work. My past experience with another jurisdiction had this, so I'm very familiar with how it works, how it operates, and how you ensure the applicant is providing the information to say, I'm all English ivy, blackberry, and knotweed. Okay, we've got our work cut out for us.
And the holly.
And the holly. Throw them all in there. It's part of the what the restoration plan is, what the maintenance is, the initial and then the ongoing. So it's sort of the congratulations, you bought a wetland type of a situation at times. Which is like a child. You've got a lot of responsibility for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So,
So we will have those vegetative buffer standards in place when this code is adopted.
yes, same as the nonconformance language in there on the various improvements, what can happen, what can't happen, and establishing those thresholds in the packet as well. But they would be added in as new sections
Okay.
within the code.
All right, thank you. Anything else on this one? Looking around the room. Seeing none, so thank you for your work on this.
All right. Moving on to just the minor change, I'll group the last three together. Minor changes, no real comments from City Council on what we briefed you on last time. We'll do some updates to definitions as we've gone through these. Everything that we could find is in there at this time. We did make the change to instead of calling them stream buffers, calling them riparian management zones or RMZs. So that would be a new term as an example. And stream buffer pops up a lot in the code, so there's a few pages to update there. But everything else on here, minor changes in conjunction with the recommendation. One comment on the noxious weed list from Councilmember Curd: be sure to include the Snohomish County noxious weed list, and it was a great point. It's the best of both worlds. If one's updated sooner than the other, you've got a good list of those. And then the no changes, for one reason or another, we were not looking to make any adjustments in here. Some were recommended to be changed, and we identified that they weren't necessary. The unauthorized alterations and enforcement, or critical area critical aquifer recharge areas, as well as the special flood hazards. Talking with Public Works, they've got good justification within their approaches how the recommendation wasn't applicable, and how we apply our standards. And the geologically hazardous areas didn't have any recommendations in there. Real quick, the SEPA threshold change. This is where there's a minimum and a maximum that the state establishes. You can just follow the minimum, or you can adopt something up to the maximum. And the chart on the next page runs through that. The chart in the table as well that you saw before. Bothell's at the low end of the exemption. We follow the minimum. If you go across the street at the northern boundary with unincorporated Snohomish County, their thresholds are much higher. Very, very interesting. We found that as we discussed before, there's really no need for the minimums where they are, given all of the mitigations that are built into the code. We have standards that are out there. Of the 194 in the last 10 years, determination of SEPA determinations, only 3 had mitigating measures. One was Chick-fil-A for obvious queuing reasons and traffic safety. One was for a large excavation for residents on a steep slope that we wanted to double down on the recommendations from the geotechnical engineer to follow those requirements. And then one was for some underground storage tanks. Again, applying just the conditions that the state would require anyway, but so those are very few and far between. So there's very limited relevance to having the levels where we were, and City Council agreed with that, with bumping them up. So we would go to the blue line, which is where Redmond currently is, and allow for those projects, whether it's 30 single-family residences as part of a plat. It would not need to go through SEPA. It would still go through a public process. There would still be public noticing. There would still be the opportunity to comment, the opportunity to appeal if somebody felt that the city did not follow our standards. Our standards, like many of the jurisdictions up here, are very, very strong and very, very good. And they've been built over the years to make sure that they can mitigate for this. A city that may not have a very robust code like ours would rely on SEPA heavily. And those you would expect to have the minimum threshold, so that if you were doing 5 units, you could make sure to add in conditions that might be applicable if your development standards didn't follow those.
Maybe dumb question, just to clarify, we jumped to square feet, not units, right, with the office, school, commercial, and barn loading?
Correct,
Right.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, not 4,000
Verify.
units or 10,000.
Just wanted to verify, yeah. Because, yeah, no units involved. Okay, just wanted to clarify.
And that is what I have for you. If there's any other questions on the minor or no change or the SEPA recommendation, happy to answer any of those questions.
Commissioners? Seeing none? Guess we'll conclude this
All
item.
right, that's great. We'll be back. We'll be moving through to go through adoption, setting up for findings, conclusions, and recommendation, and then take it to City Council for ordinance, I think, in December. So,
All right, thank you. Moving on to middle housing and inclusionary housing code updates. Yes, welcome.
All right, good afternoon, Planning Commission. So tonight I'm here to give a update on our middle housing code update that we're working on in our inclusionary zoning amendments. Next slide. And so tonight staff is seeking input and feedback on 2 potential zoning code amendments, adjustments to a middle housing allowance, and amendments to expand inclusionary zoning standards to additional areas of the city. No action is required tonight. As I go through these slides, please keep these key questions in mind that I have up here. They're also on the packet as well. And just to kind of give a little bit of background to refresh us all, our middle housing code update. Right now, as it stands, we allow, last year, the middle housing code update allowed 4 units citywide on the areas highlighted yellow. The comp plan update expanded that further, and including allowing some areas allow up to 6 units per lot now, and the areas highlighted orange. Next slide. What we're working on now is creating a draft code to make that uniform across the city by allowing 6 across the city in the zonings that were not affected yet by the code update or by the middle housing implementation of last year. So as you can see on the table here, we have on the left our current zoning categories that allow 2 by base, including up to 4 if they're near quarter mile of transit or provide affordable housing. We want to get that up to 6 units, either because they're a quarter mile of transit or because they have an affordable housing unit. And so that's for middle housing, and now talking to the inclusionary zoning. So on the image you see here to the right, the areas in pink the areas in pink and green allow MFTE, our multifamily tax exemption program, and the areas highlighted in green have a mandatory affordable housing overlay requirement. This represents 4% of Bothell's residential area that actually has a required affordability, or either required or voluntary affordability. Not Page Areas Canyon Park, which has its own overlay as well, but that also is included as part of the 4%. Staff is recommending expanding that to all of downtown and Canyon Park zone, as well as the RM3 and RM4 zoning by the end of the year. By doing that expansion, that would get us up to 32% of the city zone that is residentially zoned to have require affordable housing. And the reason why we're pushing that is because it's part of our HB 1220 requirements, we are now required to plan for affordable housing. We can't just hope that it happens. We actually have to be intentional about meeting those housing targets. And our housing targets for the next 20 years, over 80% of the housing target has to be at the 80% or below AMI. For context, 80% AMI here in the East Side region, by numbers by ARCH, is 82,000 for one person, and 106,000 for a family of 3. And so we've heard a lot from developers, that they are interested in having these units set aside for the 80% below AMI, but they want something in return. And so some of the incentives we're considering adopting to make it a fair exchange for a developing community is the list you see up here. And this list is comprehensive. We are dividing this into 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. As I mentioned, we're hoping to adopt some of these by the end of the year, and those would be most likely the height increases through the permit expediting. MFTE, we hear a lot from our development community that it will be revised in our second phase, which we're going to be starting at the beginning of next year. And we're also open to consider other incentives that are not listed here as well. And as bonus, we're also giving this quick general update on our housing action plan update. So we're in the second phase of the housing action plan which is talking with the community. We identified a list of stakeholders, and we have a tentative outline of events that we want to plan with the community for the next 6 months, of places we want to table, groups that we want to reach out to, focus groups that we want to set up to get this meaningful input on the broader housing action plan. So not just the work that we're doing with our middle housing and inclusionary zoning, but just the broader goals and objectives that we want to address, because we know that we have a housing shortage and we want to get that input from the community, not just people who typically participate, but people who don't participate, who are underrepresented and underplanned. We want to get that perspective. We are working with our consultants our consultants have already identified those groups, and now they're working by putting the boots on the ground and actually reaching out to them, setting up those meetings, and creating these events and these spaces where the community can come and give us that input. So we're not just sending an online service, we are going to be doing that, but we're also meeting them where they're at. And so in summary, no actions required tonight. We were just here to provide a planning commission, you guys, an update and to discuss and provide input on adjustments to the middle housing allowance that I mentioned, and the amendments to expand the inclusionary zoning standards to general areas of the city. And so our discussion questions for tonight are up here. We'd love to start with plan number 1. Does planning commission have any comments or additional suggestions to the proposed middle housing base and maximum unit standards that I showed on the earlier graph? On the earlier table.
Commissioners, Commissioner Lever.
Thank you, so Commissioner Lever here. So my comment is around like the AMI actually. Okay. So I know that it's not necessarily part of the question here, but when I look at the inclusionary zoning and then some of the vacancy that we're seeing in other municipalities, and knowing how expensive it is on this side, like what's kind of like the strategy that the city is taking to making sure that when and if we do meet our affordability goals, that these units don't remain vacant, like is happening in other municipalities?
Yeah, so you're asking how do we actually get people in those units,
Correct.
right? And we just create the units and we say job well done. And
because that seems to be happening, and the AMI,
yes.
You did mention it. So how can we be, I guess, from the lessons learned and then knowing what those systemic issues that we have in terms of barriers, like how can that be part of this conversation?
Yes, and that is definitely work we're going to be doing a lot with human services. So Anand, who works in human services, I'm not sure if you all met, but Anand's fantastic. Anand and Becky and the human services team, we're working with them to kind of get the next step, right? So once we create these units, how are we actually connecting people to these resources? How do they know that these units exist and that they can apply for it and get in those units? All of these units we're proposing that will be administered by ARCH, our regional housing coalition, which is the east side affordable housing providers, and not just for us, but for Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, up to Issaquah, all of the east side region. They have staff and expertise and industry experience in getting people into these units. They have a great team of outreach of social workers and coordinators that are in these communities that are most affected by, they're most sensitive to housing prices, and getting them the information needed to apply for these units. They, along with our human services team, will work together to get people to these units.
Because, thank you so much, that's helpful. Because in terms of the unit size, I think about the families who oftentimes may meet the criteria, but there's not a unit because there's a shortage of like larger units. So when I see, if you can go back to the table, which is like I think it was going from, like that's the minimum, right? That's the floor, the 6. But what is, based on the analysis that you've been doing, what is the housing size need that we have in Bothell to meet the demand of affordable housing?
Are you asking if we know if we need more 1-bedrooms or
Yes.
3-bedrooms?
Right.
Yeah, we don't have the quantitative data for that just yet, but from what we're hearing a lot from developer community and what we're hearing a lot from just residents in our initial surveys, we're hearing a lot of we need family-size housing, right? And that can be 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. That can even be a 1-bedroom that's bigger, that allows kids to share, or that allows a family to share that one room. We're hearing a lot of that, and so we're going to dive deep into that. That's part of the engagement in our housing action plan, is asking that question. What do you need if you're going to have a family? If you want a family here in Bothell, what kind of size unit do you need to actually have a family here in Bothell?
Commissioner Sills?
So to clarify, we're talking about affordable units created by MFTE, or is it sort of different?
No,
That's the main.
it's both. It's MFTE and our inclusionary zoning amendment. So MFT will be voluntary, and then our inclusionary will be a mandatory inclusionary. So
Can you say that one more time?
Yes. So there's two, and it sounds very confusing at first. So we have MFT, which is optional, but a developer can choose to have
Right.
an MFT unit or not.
To get the credit. tax
And that we're imagining will that be citywide, and then there will be some parts of the city that have a mandatory inclusionary zoning requirement, where any development in that zoning must have a certain number of units set aside for a percentage of AMI below 80%.
Okay. And then my next question with that, I guess, with the mandatory and the MFT, you have a referral system that was very helpful to hear about. Do we have data, though, on who ultimately ends up getting that unit? Or is there going to be some sort of mechanism? Because what I've heard or observed anecdotally, not in the great state of Washington, but in other areas, is that, a 22-year-old who is in their first job and meets that income threshold gets the unit over a single mom with 2 kids, because of the people who are in the position to make that decision. So I just wonder, and I'm not saying that we need to step in, but I think we need to somehow see the demographics of who actually ends up getting these units.
That's a great question, yes, and we can work with ARCH to collect those demographic information.
Cool, thank you.
Commissioner Lever?
Thank you. That actually brings me to a question on the map that you show us with where the current zones are. So, and I believe we have that number, and apologies, I don't remember. What is the number of affordable units that we currently have in the city? And do we know what that vacancy rate looks like?
We don't know what the vacancy rate looks like for affordable units, but right now the only dedicated affordable units that are online is the shack housing here across the street. And then there's some that are administered by King County that were built decades ago through federal funding through HUD. And we also don't have the data for that, but we're working with ARCH to collect that data, gather it.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Commissioner Westerbeck here. We've got, say, the 4 major incentives. Are we going to be able to allow developers to stack those? Can they do MFTE, permit expediting, impact fee reduction, permit fee reduction, and height increases, all of them, to defray the costs of the inclusionary zoning housing?
That's a great question. We'll be, right now these incentives are just high level, and so as we work on the actual mechanisms of what that looks like, we'll see if there'll even be developer interest to stack them up and how that might play out. So we'll have to see, until we actually have the mechanisms, we can actually see if it's something we want to stack or not. Depends on our capacity to actually, when the developer says all of them, we'll have to see if that's within our.
Because I think being in the business, you're going to need to maybe offer to allow stacking of at least 2, 3, maybe all 4 of them. Because I say that just because it is getting so incredibly expensive to deliver a unit of housing now. New housing is simply just period. Reading an article about it the other day, but also I do this. It's not affordable. You can't do it without giving part of it away. So it might cost $800,000 or whatever to build a unit, a family-sized unit. But it has to be rented or sold at an effectively, 60 or 80% of what it costs to build. So you're asking them to take a loss. And, it's fine, that's how the program works. I mean, it's not fine, but that's how the program works, and that's what inclusionary zoning is. So it has to be so good, they at least have to break even and make money on those other four to be solvent and make the next project. It's not even a greed thing, it's a, do you want them to survive and do another project? And so I just want to be really upfront about that. There is no such thing as affordable new housing. You can't just, we're going to make the unit $500,000 instead. No, it still costs like $800,000 to build or something like that. So I just want to be really clear about that. Having gone through this so many times, like, why can't you make it more affordable? It's like there's a floor just because of concrete and drywall and excavation and everything else that goes into building these things. So I think we're on the right path, but I think it really has to be kept in the sights is that we need to be as aggressive as we can about handing these out and saying, we really want your 2 units, and we're going to let you use all these if you need to, so you can deliver those without taking a huge loss and just leaving the city because you won't develop here again.
That makes sense. And yes, we understand that it's going to be very different for a small developer versus a big developer who has more integration.
Big developers can absorb it way more easily, but when you're doing 6, there's just no room for error at all. Like, it's slim.
So I think I mentioned this the last time, that I really need to understand how the reduction or waiving permit and impact fees is going to affect the overall capital infrastructure budget for the city of Bothell, because we have a lot of other priorities there. Everything's a trade-off, and we have a bicycle plan we're trying to implement and a whole bunch of other things, and I need to understand the scale of what we're talking about. How much are we not, what's the opportunity cost? So I guess when you come back next, if you could bring some more numbers, that would be great.
And I see Steve has.
I can help you a little bit. So I think is the first week in October that Boyd's coming with the transportation impact fee. So transportation impact fee is the one that's basically going to help fund transportation projects. And then when we did the comprehensive plan, if you go there, there's a little revenue table. For a 20-year period, it's like $97 million. What we're doing is we're doing our analysis right now on what that transportation impact fee would be. It's a little different. In the past, it was per trip. Now it's going to be per person because we've gone multimodal. You guys all know that. What we're trying to do is a couple things, one of which is allow us to lower the fee for affordable housing. And we'll probably come with 2 different alternatives, more lowering or less lowering. And it does reduce the total amount that we will receive. But at this point, we're not quite done with the math yet, but at this point, it's looking like we can do several things for affordable housing. We could also do things to kind of incentivize basically trip generation within a quarter-mile area of the bus rapid transit, within our regional growth center, within downtown, those kind of things. And I think we're even looking at one more. So with all that in mind, we're still trying to make sure that there's enough in the pot there. And it's all estimates. There's enough in the pot there that we can see our 2024 transportation plan through. So you'll hear about that in the first week in October.
That's great. So it's wonderful to hear that analysis is happening. I just would encourage the city to bring that information to us before we have to make any decisions about this or recommendations about this.
Can I add one thing? Sorry, from the side table again. So Ray and other staff, we have met our first of 3 workshops, roundtables with a development group, Development Services Advisory Group, builders in the area, to talk through exactly what Commissioner Westerbeck was talking about, and as well you, Commissioner Jones, sort of what is this value, what is this trade-off, and as we work through that, what is the floor of, you can't make a unit for less than X. How do we make sure that the incentives are right-sized and they are truly incentives to get these units built. And it's going to be a little bit of everything, a little bit of traffic impact fee reductions, a little bit of permit fee reductions potentially. You know, if somebody wants to pursue MFTE, you know, I think we've heard you in, you know, considering what the multiple layers of if you want to apply 4 or 5 incentives, go ahead. If that's what it is, or do you have to provide greater affordability, or a couple units that are of greater affordability? It changes the metric a little bit. We'll be able to come back with what that looks like. The consultant that we're working with is helping us through that exercise to make sure what the pro formas are, what the building community has identified as, okay, that floats or that sinks, and give you guys the understanding that can help with what these incentives may be. Height, we can always say, okay, you can add 2, 3, 4, however many floors. Adding more units means more affordable units, great. But in the end, how does it really pencil out, and does it work? So we'll actually have a incentive-based code that will see those deed-restricted affordable units of varying levels constructed. So.
Commissioner Lever?
Thank you. This conversation reminded me of the growth as the Affordable Housing Committee with King County. How does the city of Bothell interact with this committee? Because they have done a lot of work around really understanding the barriers for affordability. And it is my understanding that through their recommendations to the county, they really came up with a lot of findings. How does the city interact with that committee?
Yeah, I'd like to learn more about that committee. I'm not as familiar with it, so if you are happy to send those resources, I'd love to learn more about them.
Okay, that will be super helpful. So if I may answer the questions, because I want to make sure that I give you the answer to your questions. So does the Planning Commission have any comments or suggestions? So my suggestion, again, is really looking more at the AMI and really understanding how the AMI is going to impact that vacancy rate, because we definitely want to have units sitting there. The other one is around the partnership and then the funding, seeing how there's a funding deficit that we are seeing, like really being realistic of what would it take to support the small developers that are willing to do it, but they will need that mixed financing, and really who's at the table, being the private sector, or even if we can get somehow like the government or the housing authorities, as I mentioned before, to really partner with us on these. Are there other zones that should be considered for the expansion? I'm really interested in making sure that we use this process to understand what currently is in existence, and then really understand the barriers that we've had to not have more affordable housing units, or not even being able to know whether or not we are where we want to be, to answer that question, just to see, okay, where do we have the affordable units right now, and then where do we think we need them based on the lessons that we learn from the data, and then what other incentives could we have? I really think that the incentives will be with like funding, and it is more so where is the money going to come from. So when I think about the foundations, and this is a very rich and wealthy region of the country, like really understanding how the private investments can be brought into the table, and then that requires a lot of networking and the lobbying. And I know that the capacity constraint is there's just 2 different kind of strategies per se, but I really think that all of this needs to come with partnership. And then even when it comes to the affordable component, there is a stigma and there is a lot of NIMBYism about affordability. And of course, when you are thinking of a family who is below the very low income or low income, there are different barriers that they might be experiencing. And if they're going to be moving into Bothell and they're not already in here, there might be things that we need to provide to them to be able to have them successfully thrive here. If they may not live in here, like I'm thinking of like SeTac, for instance, most of the people who are living there, and there's a lot of affordable units, they work near the airport. If we're going to be moving them here for affordability, like how are we going to make sure that we can provide that transportation to the airport? Or when it comes to like the parking requirements, let's say there are Uber drivers, like really thinking of the people that we're going to house so that we can really work on not demonizing them as we really have these projects come forward, and really bringing the resources to the table so that we can have wraparound services with as we're building community here. So I believe I answered your questions. There you go.
Other commissioner comments or questions? Commissioner Gustafson.
Sarah Gustafson here. Thanks, Chair. I'd like to point out two comments that are related. First of all, my concurrence with Commissioner Lever, and also I'd like to register my opposition to requiring 6-unit or 5-unit development to include an affordable unit. To my first point, I really think it's important that we listen to Commissioner Lever about the financing aspect. This goes hand in hand with the zoning, and this is becoming more and more apparent. Even Chuck Marone, who Commissioner Westerbeck introduced me to, is now talking a lot about the finance aspect and how that needs to be built out. Because financing is difficult, and that leads me to my opposition to having inclusionary zoning at such low levels. If it's 15 or 20 units, that makes more sense. But right now, it seems like we're really barring any small developments of 5 or 6 units. And yes, the incentives will help, but it seems like it's just such a lot of administrative burden to move money around when perhaps it might be easier to just retain the fees that we would have originally charged, not require those affordable housing units, and then use that money directly by the city. One thing I would also take a look at is if we are requiring middle housing development of 5 units to have an affordable unit, then we need to have parity, and any single family subdivision of 5 units would have to have at least one of those houses be affordable. So I'd like to hear if there's any way we can revisit the inclusionary zoning requirement.
Those are great comments. Thank you. And yes, staff will consider your comments as we revise and expand. We revise and go back to the drawing board on our middle housing work.
Thank you so much.
I thank you for letting me speak first. I want to emphatically agree with Commissioner Gustafson, and I will recall that a couple years ago, we in the DT zone where we required inclusionary zoning, we had a minimum of 10 units for that very reason. So it's good for us to remember we had a reason for doing that. I totally agree, and that's kind of what I was getting at with my. I didn't want to pile on too hard, but since she brought it up, yeah, you're probably just not going to see developers do 6-unit inclusion, or probably anything under 10 or 15 or 20. It won't make any financial sense. You just won't see it happen. And the critics of inclusionary zoning for years and years now have said over and over and over again, it'd be much more effective as far as getting units on the market to just make it easier to build units, which is what Bothell, we've done a great job of that. Staff have brought us an incredible development regulation update last year. Fantastic work, even beyond what we asked for. So happy about it. Comp plan and everything. Just that is the ethos really we need to bring to it. Just make it easy to build safe units, code approved units, like single stair reform needs to happen, things like that. They just make it easy for developers to go in, build code compliant, quality, community oriented units with few roadblocks. And I won't put words into Commissioner Gustafson's mouth, but that's kind of the pushback on inclusionary zoning for years and years, which is if we kind of just make it easy to build, you'll get probably more units than if you try and squeeze a little blood from the stone and say, we want 2, instead of just make, roll out the red carpet and make it, what these incentives and stuff are great, but maybe we just give the incentives period and just make it easy to build housing, because we're looking at daunting numbers, which we've talked about in multiple meetings here. I mean, just huge numbers. I made the example before, and it's very loose. We need a couple buildings the size of 6 Oaks every year for like 20 years to hit our 80% AMI targets that we've been given by the Puget Sound Regional Council, I believe. So just these huge numbers. So we kind of just need to get out of the way. So inclusionary zoning tends to be more of a throttle than a runway on housing development.
I want to clarify two things really quick, if I can interject. One is that for middle housing, those numbers are based on what the state requires for Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. And so we base those on what the state requires for those Tier 1 cities, which are cities that are population 75,000 and above. So Bellevue, Redmond, Seattle, Everett, all the cities have to allow those two affordable units in those 6
I
units.
understand.
And so, we based on those because if we grow by our housing targets, we will reach the 75,000, and we will definitely have to comply by it. There's no exemptions. Seattle's trying to get out of it, they can't get out of it. And if Seattle can't get out of it, no one can get out of it. So there's that. And then for the inclusionary zoning, we actually have not decided yet how many, we would be the threshold for how many units you must have to then set aside those for affordable. Those are conversations, as Christian said, we're meeting with the developer community. We're figuring that out, what that number is for mandatory inclusionary zoning. But that is separate from the middle housing, what's required for affordable.
Thank you. I think those clarifications were great. I also appreciate the comments from Commissioner Westerberg and Commissioner Gustafson. And as I was listening to the analysis, which I'm glad that the city's doing and excited to see it in terms of the work with the developers, I suspect there won't actually be that many alternatives because of how tight and difficult it's going to be to get it to fit. My question is somewhat related, but maybe you're not in a position to answer it as yet. But I'm wondering how the inclusionary zoning and or any incentives can ensure that there's both residential-owned housing that's affordable as well as rental housing that's affordable because of the wealth implications associated with those two alternatives. And I haven't seen anything about that in this discussion. Thanks.
That's a great point to bring up. And yes, we are going to definitely be looking into those two tracks because we know there are two tracks, right? There's the renter that's affordable, and then there's a affordable home ownership, right? And those require different levels of incentives, different levels of financing, and different levels of just economic environmental feasibility. And so yes, we know that right now, we're kind of treating this as high level, just what we can require. In our minds, this is mostly for rentals, but we have that home ownership in our back of our heads as well. We do definitely want to consider that. We know we've seen some examples in Redmond that are coming online that are affordable ownership properties, but those require there's certain legal and regulatory additional hurdles that we had to jump through to get those. But we are considering those as well.
Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Sills and Commissioner Lever.
Do we have data per year on how many permits for single-family homes versus middle housing and affordable housing? And can we measure that? Because I think what it comes down to is, like, how are we incentivizing that over the other where the margins we know are a lot higher for developers?
Yes, we have the raw data from our InterGov permit system, and we would have to sit through it and calculate all this by hand. But we do have the data, so that is something that planning commission the next time we can definitely bring that data forward.
Commissioner Lever.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about how the school impact fee, because I know there's that new legislation is going to impact the affordable housing efforts in here, and if that can be part of the conversation as well?
We can look into the impact of the school impact fee as well.
Right.
We're considering all the fees that are coming. We can definitely look into that line as well.
Because it is my understanding that's going to make it more expensive to do any build-up, right? Like building, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. So kind of like really make sure that we take that under consideration as well as another potential barrier for affordability.
Yeah, I'll chime in here real quick. The school impact fee is set by the school district, and the city, we just carry that forward. We're just an agency that takes it in through the permitting process. So we have no ability to influence it. That would only be the North Shore School District for Bothell.
And then just to directly answer your question number 2, because I think I touched on at least number 3 already. I would like to understand, I want to be careful that we're not concentrating affordable housing in just a few areas of the city, which could lead to other challenges in those areas, and could also limit the type of housing that's available for affordability. And so I would be interested in staff recommendations as to other zones that might make sense if we're going to have inclusionary housing. With a big
Definitely.
if.
And so, as I mentioned, phase one, right now we're looking at those RM3 zoning and above. And then in phase two, we'll be looking at other zoning categories and see what the feasibility for expanding it to those zonings would be. Also including, would be, looking at the requirements for inclusionary zoning in those areas. It might be less units required, or it might be a higher, lesser affordability. We'll have to look into that because we know that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. And I do want to clarify on one point that I heard, if we're going to have mandatory inclusionary zoning, we're going to have those incentives absolutely offered as well. It's going to be offered. We're going to have to offer those incentives. It's not going to be an either or. There's definitely going to have to be incentives offered if we're going to require we're going to have inclusionary zoning.
Commissioner Sills?
I guess kind of related to the questions I was asking earlier is I think, I appreciate Commissioner Westerbeck and Commissioner Gustafson's comments about, just making sure we're getting this housing developed and not creating any barriers. And I think, again, is inclusionary zoning actually inclusionary? I really need to know that before we commit to it, because I just, again, need to make sure that that's actually fulfilling the mission that we think it is. And I've, again, anecdotally, but I know that there's a lot of cases where it is manipulated, or it's not what we view as inclusion and serving everyone and a diverse population and underrepresented or underserved population. So I think that really does make me question adding more, like we were saying, to just barriers to create more housing in all sorts of places.
Others? Mr. Westerbeck?
Just one more comment, and this is kind of left field, but thought about it before. Have we ever thought about, and I don't know if other cities have tried this, just making it completely voluntary or throughout the whole city? Just saying, we'll have a set of kind of a la carte choices, and you can do, one of these 4 things. Maybe we end up with a few more in the end, and say, if you want to do extra units, we'll incentivize it, and that's just anywhere. We're just working within your zoning. If you can do 6 already, maybe we'll let you do 7 or 8. If you can do 20 already, based on all our increased zoning. I know this is a big thing to ask, but I just don't know if anyone's tried it. Just it's completely voluntary. And some will say, gosh, it really works for us to do an extra 5 units in our 50 unit. And so why don't we go after a few of these things that seems to pencil out for us, and just, and maybe you get more units in the end doing that, kind of to my previous point. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out because I have not looked at it, but I've had that question in my mind before, and I've wondered if that's ever been tried.
Yes, as I brought up the map here. So the green is has our required we call it downtown area transition overlay, the Tahoe, and the GDC. These zoning categories require some affordable units, and then magenta is voluntary, including MFTE. We haven't seen a single developer in either the required or mandatory offer an affordable unit. So we've had this for almost 5 years, and we have not seen a single developer step in and offer an affordable unit. And so that tells us 2 things. One, that from the development community, what we're requiring right now is just not feasible in this regulatory and economic uncertainty environment. But also that too, that we need to revamp this and offer something more appealing to get developers to want to actually step in and do something. And so, just leaving the voluntary areas that are voluntary, even then, they're still not doing something. And so we know that we're going to have to meet that 80%, to meet our housing targets, that's going to be over 3/4 set aside for 80% or below AMI. We have to be a bit more aggressive with our strategy of getting those units online in the market.
I guess my only change was we just made it the whole city, but I hear you loud and clear.
Anyone else? Seeing none. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. As you can tell, there's a high level of interest in the commission on this work, and we look forward to continuing to hear from you. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you all so much tonight.
All right, we have one more study session. Are we all okay? Do we need a brief break? Power through? Okay. So, annual comprehensive plan and miscellaneous code amendments. We've had amendments and updates tonight, alternating.
Sorry, I was not finding my my slide deck here. All right. I have two main slides to go through with you. One is just the primer of what we're doing here. No action, obviously, tonight. This is the initial step in an annual comp plan amendment, as well as a couple of miscellaneous code amendments. The comp plan amendment is associated with what you just heard from Ray and Jacqueline on middle housing. The miscellaneous code amendments are those that we've sort of found as we unpack the work that we just wrapped up. So in your packet, there was an attachment, the first attachment to this item, that changed a 4 to a 6, and in a couple spots within the comprehensive plan. So this is a designation update within the RL land use designation in the comprehensive plan from last year. It only does that. It's just those few little tweaks. There's nothing else within the comp plan that we were looking to clarify. There was language within the RC designation just to kind of follow that same approach. Just recognize the language wasn't the same that talked about middle housing. It was always there. It just looked like it needed to be updated for consistency. So this will support that parallel code amendment. If we were to move forward with middle housing and in the RL zone, go from 4 to 6, we wouldn't be able to say it's consistent with the comprehensive plan if we don't do this. And this is all based on council direction asking us to consider that. Kind of an interesting thing here, we talked a lot, and you talked a lot with my predecessor before I started about growth and capacity and what would it do. There is no impact on growth with this change, and there's just a slight overall capacity change when you're talking citywide. So and part of that is because we were always anticipating with the comprehensive plan and talking with the consultants at Burke about this. They were always planning on going up to 6 units for middle housing within those growth projections, so it's not changing anything. What it might do is it might take some of the medium density growth and shift it over into the lower density growth as kind of this as middle housing, kind of filling that gap. But at the end of the day, it's not intended, and it shouldn't have any change to our overall growth. The miscellaneous code amendments, a lot of them were just cleanup or consistency items. So a couple things in there about dimensional standards. There was a kind of a holdover on height that we wanted to clean up. within the plan unit development. There were a lot of cleanup items. I think it was just a chapter that we didn't really dive into back in the end of last year, making sure that we're consistent with some of the zone names, just reflecting what they currently are. There was even a lot circle diameter reference in there that we wanted to make sure we got rid of. In Midtown, there were also some cleanup items on the name. I think something was just left over. Rather than worry about it being a Scribner's error, let's just make sure we be upfront about what that update is. And then a clarification and some streamlining within the buffer, landscape buffer requirement along the western boundary. It was formerly adjacent to a low-density residential zone with a 30-foot landscape buffer, very prescribed, very detailed standard. We already have those standards within Title 12.18 in our tree and landscape section. What we did is recognize, well, the increased zoning change to medium density residential changes what is there, or what could be there, and decrease it down to a consistently utilized landscape buffer. So decreasing it down to 20 feet, and just say follow the landscape standards in 12.18. In Lower Maywood, there was a dimensional standard consistency item regarding corner lots. When we went through the lot size, the height, all those things within the general residential zones last year, we weren't good. We weren't smart enough or knowledgeable enough. I wasn't knowledgeable enough to know to look into all of the different sub areas and are there any conflicts that are in there. So the setback on a front yard in Lower Maywood, if it was on a corner, was set at 20 feet on your primary and 15 feet on your secondary. Well, we reduced the front setbacks down to 10 feet on any front. So just saying, let's just apply the corner lot standards as we would apply it anywhere else in the city, because we want to make sure that we're creating the canvas to build out and accommodate. So those are those updates. I included the draft language in there, trying to keep these very, very straightforward and upfront. There may be a couple other sub areas that we find as staff, just make sure we go through where it's either a consistency or a cleanup. We're not looking to make any policy changes here. Just make sure that if the zone name changed and we missed that, or if a reference was not found, we can just bring that forward. If we do find any more of those, we'll spotlight them so that you can see them all up front and out in the open. But those are the amendments. So with that, if you have any questions, happy to dive into them. Just looking to move this forward.
Any questions on these items? I think they're pretty straightforward, so.
Great.
Well, thank you. Quicker than I thought.
Thank you. That's what I like.
Just to thank you for catching them, because sometimes we're going through the code and wait, this seems weird. So, glad you found us.
Yeah. It's funny when you don't see it until you start applying the code, and that's where most of these come from. And our eyes cross, and our one person asks another person, and like, wait a second, what's going on here? And then they come to my desk, and I say, I have no idea. Let's fix it.
All right. Well, I believe that concludes our study sessions. Reports from members. Anything to bring to the group? All right. Seeing none. Reports from staff.
Next meeting will be October 1st, I believe.
Yep.
And we'll have a full session. As Steve mentioned, we'll have transportation impact fee discussion and a couple other items, trying to make sure we move these things through. I do want to mention that last night at City Council, there was a discussion on parking management, parking enforcement in the downtown. So that conversation has started, spearheaded out of the city manager's office with many departments and divisions involved. So Eric Jaszewski in our office will be keeping an eye on that as it affects the downtown, and Ray on housing and others as we move forward. So just want to make sure I pointed that out.
Well, great. It's good to hear there's the beginnings of movement on that, anyhow. There being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
Commissioner Westerbeck, I move to adjourn the Planning Commission.
Or second?
Commissioner Jones, second.
Been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 8:05. Our next meeting will be October 1. We'll see you all then. October already.
Recording stopped.